Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George. With me, as always, some of the best minds in the world of MMA. This week, we got the Boston shot caller. Nolan King is back, still glowing from watching his Celtics take down KD and Kyrie, sending them on an early vacation. Danny Segura, the host of Hablemos MMA en Español. Check him out over at youtube.com/HABLEMOS MMA. And of course, Mike Bond. He's rounding out the squad, the hardest working journal in the Great White North. The man doesn't take a day off. Cold coffee is on the ones and twos. Let's get to it, fellas. Marlon Vera scored a huge win over Rob Font on Saturday on ESPN 35, despite losing the total strikes count 233 to 134. However, the huge knockdowns in rounds 2, 3, and 4, in addition to some vicious ground and pound, through that, Vera was able to damage Font badly. Seems like the unified rules of MMA had this type of fight in mind when they were updated in 2017 with the strong emphasis on effective striking, aka damage. Yet the fight before, Andrei Arlovski won a split decision over Jake Collier. And MMA media that turned in scorecards to MMAdecisions.com, they all had it for Jake Collier. Where are we when it comes to MMA scoring? Is it great? Is it good? Is it fair? Is it poor? Other major sports leagues sometimes issue statements regarding officiating decisions from the prior week or weekend of games. Should commissions do that here as well? 4 minutes are on the clock. Nolan, get things started.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a hot take to some people, but I actually think MMA scoring is pretty good, especially when you compare it to boxing. I mean, sure, is there room for improvement? Are there bad decisions like the one we saw between Arlovski and Collier on Saturday night? Absolutely. Those things exist. There's no denying. I think, you know, you go to Texas for fights, we have all sorts of weird stuff happen. But overall, I think a lot of times the decisions that I see people complain about, they don't necessarily, I don't know, they're not terrible. I mean, people call robbery all the time, left and right. This is a robbery, that's a robbery. When there's a lot of close rounds or a couple of close rounds and a judge, you know, sees it slightly one direction and you think it's slightly the other. I mean, these rules are kind of interpretive. I mean, you look at obviously the main event last weekend was scored properly. There was, you know, I don't think there were any other real issues. Maybe there were some bad scorecards. I think that's something that gets overlooked, is the fact that sometimes you can have the right person win, but then when you go back and look at the scorecards, you'll be like, what the heck? So I think the public perception of scoring is perhaps not necessarily accurate compared to the reality of it. You know, that's not to say that, like I said, there's room for improvement. I think judges should be held accountable for their bad scorecards. I think more transparency when it comes to letting judges explain themselves. I think the few times we've seen that, I've actually really enjoyed it, even if I don't necessarily agree with the person. And I know not all commissions allow that. You know, I know sometimes judges get themselves in hot water with certain commissioners who won't be named here, but that don't like them to talk to the media. There's been ones that have talked to us that have gotten in trouble recently. So I think that more transparency is good, but I also think for fans to get a better understanding of the scoring system would also go a long way and show that maybe it's not as bad as people think it is.
All right. I like it from Nolan, kind of backing up the judging and the refs. Danny, how do you feel about this?
I don't think it's terrible. I do think that sometimes we overreact, or when I say we, fans, you know, saying, oh, this is a robbery, but really it's just a close fight, but maybe your favorite fighter lost. But I do think there is room for improvement. I don't think there's necessarily a whole lot wrong with the 10-point system. I think for boxing is great. Obviously, the sample size there is bigger because we have 12 to 10 rounds. So, you know, it makes things a little bit easier to score and it gives a more accurate picture. But when you're only dealing with 3 or 5 rounds, I mean, I don't think the system is adequate for this sport and the small amount of rounds that we have. So I would like to suggest a half-point system. I do think that paints a better picture and will probably get more accurate decisions and would lead to actually getting the rightful winner. In this case, the fight against Collier and Arlovski, yeah, it was a pretty terrible decision. I don't know how many people can disagree with that. I had it 30-27 for Collier, but I do think it's important for the commission to answer to the public regarding these issues. Send one person designated to talk to the media about this. I don't know, work something, because they are public officials. They do work for the state. They do work for the commission. And I think everyone should be held accountable for the decisions that they make, and they need to answer for them. So hopefully that changes in the future. But all in all, that half point system, I would like to see it implemented.
All right, I haven't heard anything that sounds like poor. I'm hearing more good and fair. How about you, Mike? Is there a great in here somewhere, or how do you feel?
I think it can be poor at times. It can be adequate at times. It just really depends on the circumstance. I mean, I think for the volume of MMA that we do get, of late, cards every weekend with 10 or 12 fights, I don't think it's as bad as it could be. It's definitely improved in my opinion, but I think Danny and Nolan both use the word accountable, and I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. I think these judges are in a position where they can, put in these scorecards and they don't get the feedback that they should, or have to kind of stand up behind them. And that's the big thing I'd like to see change here. I know we're kind of over time, so I'll just leave it at that.
All right, fair enough. And hey, that strike count might have favored Font, but if you looked at their faces, I think you'd have a different opinion as to who won the fight. So maybe it all worked out there. All right. Adding UFC on ESPN 35 winner Alexander Romanov to the mix. Is the UFC's heavyweight division as good as it's ever been, guys? Especially if and when John Jones makes his long-awaited debut, could this take over as the marquee division in the UFC? Lightweights, you guys are kind of on notice, but other divisions are popping too. Danny, tell me what you think.
Yeah, certainly the UFC heavyweight division is making a lot of noise. I think it's the best it's ever been, probably since the Cain Velasquez, Brock Lesnar era, Fabricio Werdum, back when all those big names were still young enough that they held the relevancy in the division. John Jones, Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou, Cyril Gane, Tom Aspinall, Tai Tuivasa, I mean, you name them. Finally, we got some interesting personalities, big names, a lot of skill, and all of a sudden the top is getting very, very, very competitive. But, put that aside, I don't think that it's still the best division in the UFC. Obviously, heavyweights are always going to sell, but I don't think it's the marquee division. I think after probably number 6 in the rankings or so, it really begins to drop off quite noticeably. I don't think the top 10 or the top 15 is too competitive with the current champion. And that's a signal of how good the division is. I think at lightweight that extends a little bit further, maybe till 10 or 11. But I do think the best division right now in mixed martial arts and in the UFC is bantamweight. I mean, anybody in the top 15 can give, a tough fight to the champion. The belt is constantly changing hands. Tons of big names from, up and comers, youngsters, to well-established fighters, to old veterans that still got it. I mean, bantamweight is the goods. It's got it. You would wish for in a division.
All right, Mike Bond, what do you think, man? Is this division popping or what? We got worldwide representation. We got beer guzzlers, shoeys going on in this division. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's more fun than it's ever been. I don't think there's any question of that. I mean, you just look at the diversity top to bottom, kind of that era Danny was talking about from like 2009 to 2013. I mean, you look at someone like Cain Velasquez, who over the span of 5 fights fought 2 guys in Antonio Silva and Junior Dos Santos. So I don't think you kind of had the parity in terms of the guys there. I think Mick Maynard, the matchmaker, has done a really good job rebuilding this in the last few years. And I remember writing a column kind of to this effect maybe about 14 months ago when we had Tom Aspinall, I think, on like an undercard, and he fought on the same event as maybe, Cyril Gane or something like that. And I was just like, this is the future of what we have. And you look at what it is now, these guys are headlining events in, Paris and all these places around the world. Heavyweights headline more cards than any division in the UFC. And that's obviously, because of the size and the fact they look great on a marquee and everything. I'm not going to sit here and say heavyweight is the most talent-rich division, because it's absolutely not. You could argue maybe every other division outside of light heavyweight has more talent from top to bottom, but I think if we're comparing here to what it's been in the past, what it is now, I don't think you can sit here and make like a true argument that it's not the strongest it's ever been. I don't think it's ever going to have, as Danny kind of said, that depth from 1 to 15. But you look at a guy like Romanov, who's unranked right now, and it seems like he could have a big future there. So I think it's only going to get better from here on out.
Yeah, and if I might tip my hand, Romanov's going to make some moves up, fellas. Watch out for those USA Today Sports MMA Junkie rankings. Nolan, finish things off.
Yeah, Mike hit it on the head. I think it is the best that it's ever been right now. And I think, the scouting is great. I think heavyweight actually, there's a lot less options as somebody kind of follows the regional scenes across the United States. Like, it's hard to find heavyweights that are even like 5-0 or 6-0. And a lot of times they get to kind of that LFA level and they lose one to a guy that's 3-3 or something. So, I mean, it's the most unpredictable division period. It's hard to build stars because it takes really one punch more than even every other division takes one punch to end a fight. But I think the UFC's done an excellent job of not only cultivating stars, but looking around the world and being able to take risks on guys. I mean, Francis Ngannou was a pretty raw talent when they brought him in. A guy from Cameroon, not necessarily known at the time for its MMA, history or anything. So good on the UFC for taking risks and really identifying talent across the world.
Yeah, how about a shout out to the Black Beast as well? He's definitely been very active and helping build this division, man. All right, so let's go to the next one. So this is a staff-wide conversation going public for once. Mike Bond kind of runs these awards on a monthly basis. This week, man, I really had to think about it. The topic is we had some great submissions in the month of April. As a staff, we voted, we vote for our best KO submission and fight of the night every month. This month, it was more difficult than others in that submission category. Multiple knee bars, standing arm triangles, neck cranks, or scarf holds, however you want to look at it. Which sub was your favorite and why? 4 minutes are on the clock. We're going to start off with Mike Bond, the author of this article.
Yeah, this is always going to be a matter of opinion. That's why we do voting. That's why it's never pretty much rarely unanimous. But for me, when I look at, these type of things and we have our year-end discussions, monthly discussions, there's three really factors that go into what I quantify for what defines the quote unquote best. And it's the stakes of the fight, the style of the submission or knockout or whatever you get, and then the quality of opponent. And I think Jessica Andrade's standing arm triangle choke over Amanda Lemos really kind of ticked all the boxes there. Of course, it's a main event. Lemos coming into that fight was on a 5-fight winning streak. She was kind of viewed as like the next big thing in this division, a potential title contender. And Andrade goes out there and does her with something in terms of style that's never been done before in the history of the UFC, the first ever standing arm triangle. So to me, that's a pretty impressive way to get it done. We've seen all the other submissions we're going to talk about in one form or another happen before. So to go out there and in this day and age with over 600 UFC events in the books to get a submission or win with a technique that's never been done before, I think that's pretty hard to argue against. So again, it's all going to come down to personal preference, but for me, that's what stands out the most. Jessica Andrade should be the winner here.
That was a good one, man. It was like Lemos was out for a walk near the lake and she got her neck snatched by a boa constrictor that came out of nowhere. Thing of beauty. How about you, Nolan? Which one was your favorite?
What a segue, George. Boa constrictor. I mean, Mike's answer was the right one. I mean, that's the right one. But I'll make a case for a second one, which was Alexei Oleinik. Mike just touched on it. He said there's, a lot of different boxes he checked. I'm very much of the opinion that when somebody's doing something that no one else can do, that's kind of what my number one thing I look at is even if it's like Cage Warriors and somebody hits like a crazy kick or a crazy submission, that'll be my pick. Cause I'm like, man, I just haven't seen that. And Alexei Oleinik being ancient and so experienced and a heavyweight, getting beat up all the time and then pulling off weird submissions, that's kind of my favorite thing I think right now going. So I thought his win over Jared Vanderaa was kind of, summed him up. It was almost predictable down to a T. If you ask hey, just, script out an Alexei Oleinik fight for somebody that's never seen all these other fights and just so they can kind of absorb what he brings to the cage. That was it for me. I think he's got kind of that Damian Maia thing where you watch it, you look at his body type, you see who he's fighting, and you don't really understand how the whole thing plays out, but it does. And so for me, shout out to Alexei Oleinik for pulling off another interesting submission in a division where we don't see a ton of interesting submissions. And yeah, man, it'll be interesting to see how far he can continue to keep doing this. I mean, he's in his 40s. He's been doing this longer than anybody else. There's guys on the UFC roster that weren't even born when he started. So that type of all that weird stuff. Yeah, that's kind of my jam. I dig it. And so shout out to Alexei Oleinik.
Yeah, mid 40s, 60 dubs, man. That guy's incredible. Danny, are you going to break a tie or are you going to throw a third one into the mix here?
I think number one's got to be Jessica Andrade. I mean, it was historic. It was awesome. It was super cool. But as you said, George, at the beginning, we were spoiled with a bunch of cool submissions this month. I mean, that Alexei Oleinik submission was also fantastic. But I also have to include in that group Claudio Puelles, the Peruvian prince. I mean, he pulled off a slick knee bar over the veteran Clay Guida. Clay Guida is a very good grappler. He's somebody that's tough to submit. Obviously, he's been submitted before in the past, but still, it's no easy task. And Claudio Puelles just keeps snatching these knee bars. I might even dare to say that he's got the best knee bar in the game right now, or at least in the UFC. He just keeps getting them consistently. They're so explosive. They don't give his opponents any time to defend. So great submissions this month. Claudio Puelles deserves to be at the top with all those names, but I agree with Mike. That Jessica Andrade standing arm triangle was just a beauty to watch.
Yeah. 3 knee bars, by the way, in the UFC for Puelles, 1 outside the UFC. That's pretty incredible to a guy who's been in there with Nate, Leo Santos, RDA, BJ Penn, other submission wizards, and survived and won. All right, let's go to topic number 4. 3 major promotions compete this week. 3 major promotion champions compete this week. Who is the most likely to lose? Sound like negative Nancy over here, but hey, it's a good question. Ryan Bader defends his heavyweight title against Cheick Kongo at Bellator 280 on Friday. Charles Oliveira defends his lightweight title versus Justin Gaethje at UFC 274 on Saturday, and Rose Namajunas defends her strawweight title also at UFC 274 against Carla Esparza. So the last 2 are on Saturday. Which title is the most at risk here, fellas? 4 minutes are on the clock. Nolan, get that party started.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I hope I don't get too much heat for saying this, but I really feel like there's only one option for me to pick here, and that's Justin Gaethje beating Charles Oliveira. You know, I did submit my staff pick for this, but I think there's a chance that I flip-flop. I mean, it's just the most competitive fight out of the 3. I mean, I think Bader should do it again against Cheick Kongo. I think Rose is just a step ahead of Carla. It doesn't mean that she can't win, but I think Charles versus Gaethje, I mean, if you pick one or the other and you're in a conversation with somebody that disagrees with you, they can't hate on this. They can't hate on your opinion on this fight. I mean, lightweight right now, you mentioned it earlier in the show, George, arguably the most competitive division, especially in the ranked fighters in the UFC. So I think this one could really go either way. I think Charles has time and time again, proven people wrong. The fact that he's even champion is proving people wrong in a certain regard. And Justin Gaethje has just continued to show that he is the most miserable, tough outing for anybody that steps in the cage with him, win or lose. So it's just, I think this is a very obvious choice for me to go with the main event at UFC 274 in Phoenix on Saturday.
Chucky Olives most at risk, according to Nolan King. Danny Segura, are you feeling that?
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, all the title fights have a little bit of risk for the champion, I believe. I think it's not going to be an easy walk in the park for each champion. They're definitely going to have to put in a lot of work to retain their belt. But if I had to pick somebody, I think it's Charles Oliveira. And I'm on the train that's always defending Charles Oliveira, the champion. Put some respect on this man's name. I mean, he's so great. How is he the champion and always entering fights as the underdog, this and that? But, I mean, as much as I want to defend him, Justin Gaethje is a complete savage. I mean, the guy just has a bunch of knockouts to his name, hits hard, has cardio for days. His volume is quite ridiculous, has a really good chin as well. And we've seen Charles Oliveira get dropped before, and we've seen him get finished before as well. Maybe not in recent times, but certainly in the past, people have put him away. So, that possibility always exists, even though it seems like he's been able to take shots a little better now than before. A shot from Justin Gaethje is still a shot from Justin Gaethje. So I still have to put some respect on that man's name. I see him as the favorite entering this bout, but by no means it is far-fetched that Justin Gaethje can go in there and just smack him and pick up a quick knockout. So we'll see how that fight turns out, but certainly I think Charles Oliveira is playing with fire here, and he's got the toughest fight out of all the title defenses that we're going to see this weekend.
You mentioned Oliveira has been knocked down before. He has, but guess what, guys? Carla Esparza has beaten Rose Namajunas before. It was 8 years ago. I get it. Mike Bond, is it unanimous, or are you with these guys?
No, I'm not going to make it unanimous just because I have picked against Charles Oliveira, I think, the past 3 fights. And you know what? I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to sit here and make this mistake a 3rd time in a row, especially when I feel like out of the past 4 fights he's had, this one probably has the clearest path to victory. And I know they're completely different fighters, but I can't get the image of what Khabib Nurmagomedov did to Justin Gaethje when that fight hit the floor and how quickly he cut through his ground defense and was able to submit him. Charles Oliveira, of course, is a freak of nature. If he gets Gaethje to the ground, I think this thing is going to be a wrap. Of course, Justin Gaethje could knock him out before we even get there, but I'm not going to now pick against Charles Oliveira for all the reasons I said. So I will go in thinking that it's going to be Rose Namajunas for what you alluded to there, George. The fight has happened before. We have seen her lose. I think Rose, of course, has improved tremendously in the 8 years since their first fight. But as we just saw against Zhang Weili, I don't think her ground game is perfection by any means. There is some flaws still there, some flaws I think Carla Esparza is capable of exposing. I think she's a huge underdog. It's going to take a near perfect effort from Esparza, but I think she can win this fight. So for the sake of differentiating this conversation, I'll say Carla Esparza over Rose Namajunas.
All right, great stuff from three of the best in the biz. So apologies to the French fans out there. I know France is blowing up with MMA. Maybe they were expecting to hear their guy's name. All right, last topic here. This week we have some notable names competing. Tony Ferguson, for example, he faces Mike Chandler in the feature bout at UFC 274. Mauricio Shogun Rua, he will dance with OSP of Insane Peru in the swing bout of UFC 274. On that same card, the leadoff bout is Donald Cerrone against Joe Lazon. So, tough grizzly veterans. They've done it for a long time. Could any of these athletes lay down the gloves after their fights on Saturday? If so, who was the most likely? We got 4 minutes on the clock. Danny, you're up.
I'm going to go with Shogun Rua. This is the last fight of his contract entering this fight against OSP. And he said that, he wants to finish things up in the UFC. So I know there's such thing as hashtag MMA retirement. So that might not mean a whole lot. And Shogun may continue fighting elsewhere. Who knows? Maybe get an extension if he feels good and gets a victory out there and just decides to continue fighting. But aside from his comments about, him wanting to walk away and this being the last fight of his contract, you just got to look at the man's record. Out of all the people that you mentioned, he's the one that's been fighting the longest. He might not have the most amount of fights, but certainly the longest. He's been fighting since 2002. The guy's also the oldest out of the bunch. He is 40 years old. And just as far as damage, I know all these other guys have taken tons of damage as well, and they've been in their fair share of wars, but Shogun Rua has been at the top for so long, and I think that's the key difference. I mean, he was a dog back in Pride and did wonderful things over there, and he was just fighting murderers after murderers, just constantly the very best the division had to offer. We also have heard rumblings over the years, rumors how hard he trained at Shoot the Box and how grueling those training sessions were, and up to some extent not even smart. They would just kind of kill each other in sparring. So he's got a ton of mileage. I think after he fights OSP, he's going to hang him up. I think, the biggest chance we see of a retirement there is going to be with Shogun Rua.
There are stories that go back to Shootbox where they would fight over a baby pit bull. The winner would take the pit bull home, man. Those guys would throw down for anything. All right. How about you, Mike Bond? Who are your thoughts on who might call it quits after Saturday?
I think Danny's choice of Shogun is pretty apt. I think that's probably going to be the one that's like pretty much a lock no matter how this fight goes. For the contract reason, he said this event was originally likely to happen in Brazil. They had to shift it because of, COVID issues and all that kind of stuff. But we were kind of looking at the Shogun retirement fight in Brazil. So unless they're going to Brazil in the very short order and he still wants to push to do that, I think this is probably it for him. But who's to say it's not going to be more than one guy in this scenario? And I look at Donald Cerrone as a person who's definitely on the hot seat here. I mean, 6 fights in a row without a win. He's got the no contest in there, and they've been getting progressively uglier for him. Of course, the Alex Morono fight, it was a last-minute opponent change. He loses in the first round there, and then he's got quite a few knockouts in this rough stretch for him as well. So I think Dana White said after the last fight with Morono, he wanted to give him another chance to do the full camp, to fight at lightweight. Cerrone's wanted to be back there. So I think pretty much everything hinges on this. I don't know what would happen in the scenario if Cerrone loses this, if the UFC is going to try to force him out, if they want to give him a job, if they're going to let him walk and leave it up to Donald to maybe fight elsewhere. There's a lot of different ways this can go, but I think if Donald Cerrone loses to Joe Lowe's on Saturday, it might be the last time we see the famous cowboy in the octagon, which would be potentially a depressing scene back-to-back with Shogun there. So this could be an interesting emotional start to this UFC 274 main card.
I was just about to say, this is kind of turning into a depressing topic, man. We're losing our heroes. Nolan King, finish things off.
Yeah, the UFC, if they were still branding events, they could do UFC 274 depression. But I think looking at the options here, everything everybody said is accurate. But if I was to have to bet on one of these people to never fight again, it would be Joe Lozon. And that's because I think win or lose, we could see him step away, whereas it seems the others probably still have a little bit more of that fire. Joe obviously has been kind of quasi-retired for the last few years. And so I think even with the win here, it's possible he just is like, You know, I just beat Cowboy. That's a cool fight. That was a cool moment on a big main card. That's going to be it for me. So that's really the difference. I think there's just like twice as good of a chance that Lozon retires compared to everyone else.
Well, all those are certain possibilities. We'll be tuning in for sure at UFC 274, and keep it locked on MMA Junkie throughout the week. We have full coverage of UFC 274 as well as Bellator 280, and don't forget PFL has started the regular season. Week 3 is upon us, so yeah, keep it locked on MMA Junkie, and we'll see you all next week here on the Spinning Back Clique.